Okay, I'm going to start us I want to read um, from Psalm
Bless you.
25. And this particular
Yep,
chapter
I'm on.
is about truth and historical, social,
What are you doing?
psychological, spiritual. This is the words that Latasha has in this chapter. And she says they shouldn't be up for debate, especially among Christians. And so we're going to be talking a lot about truth during this chapter. And reading earlier this week, during a quiet time, I came across Psalm 25. And I want us to hear these words, sorry about the squeaks, as if we were either what's often called BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color, person of color. So for just a moment, put yourself in that mindset as you listen to these words and imagine yourself praying this psalm coming from that particular point of view. To you, O Lord, I lift up my soul. O my God, in you I trust. Do not let me be put to shame. Do not let my enemies exult over me. Do not let those who wait for you be put to shame. Let them be ashamed who are wantonly treacherous. Make me know your ways, O Lord. Teach me your paths. Lead me in your truth and teach me. For you are the God of my salvation. For you I wait all day long. Be mindful of your mercy, O Lord, and of your steadfast love, for they have been from old. Do not remember the sins of my youth or my transgressions. According to your steadfast love, remember me, for your goodness' sake, O Lord. Good and upright is the Lord. Therefore, he instructs sinners in the way. He leads the humble in what is right and teaches the humble his way. All the ways of the Lord are steadfast love and faithfulness for those who keep his covenant and his decrees. For your name's sake, O Lord, pardon my guilt, for it is great. Who are they that fear the Lord? He will teach them the way that they should choose. They will abide in prosperity, and their children shall possess the land. The friendship of the Lord is for those who fear him, and he makes his covenant known to them. My eyes are ever toward the Lord, for he will pluck my feet out of the net. Turn to me and be gracious to me, for I am lonely and afflicted. Relieve the troubles of my heart and bring me out of distress. Consider my affliction and my trouble and forgive all my sins. Consider how many are my foes and with what violent hatred they hate me. O guard my life and deliver me. Do not let me be put to shame, for I take refuge in you. May integrity and uprightness preserve me, for I wait for you. Redeem my people, O God, out of all of its troubles. Amen. As I read that earlier this week and tried to put myself in the shoes or the mindset of someone who was either Black or a person of color, I heard it in a whole different way. When I've read those Psalms before about enemies, about foes, about hatred, I've never really identified with that. It was always somebody way back in David's time writing about somebody chasing him around the valley. But when I read it that way, thinking in terms of how someone could read that today, I suddenly found myself hearing it in a whole new way.
Mhm.
So I would invite you to think about that as we move on. And um, some of the stories in this book are very disturbing. The one about Mary Turner, who was lynched. And it made me think about how many, I don't know how many of you have seen or been aware of, I call it the Lynching Museum. I think it has a different name.
Yeah, that's what it is.
But it's what it is. And I wanted to show a short clip from that this morning. I can get my screen share thing to work. Okay, where am I? Come on, do your thing. All right. All right. This is their website, and let's see if I can get this to move. There's a video on here I wanted you to see if I can get to it now. Come on, where are you? Those are each one of those represents someone who's been lynched, those things that are hanging down. And it's somewhere, I think it's outside of Birmingham, if I remember correctly. I'm not doing this well. Can't make my screen move. Maybe.
What?
There's also, okay.
You can turn the light off.
Okay.
Turn the light off.
Ah, here we go. All right. Okay, this is the video I want to show you. Okay. I guess it's the National Memorial for Peace and Justice is the true name of this place.
I'm not seeing anything.
Yeah, me neither.
The link, that's it.
Should we individually touch the link?
No, you shouldn't have to. Is it not showing on your screen?
No,
Just
Wonder why. Huh.
it's being ugly.
It is being ugly. Okay. Still not seeing anything?
No.
Just the title.
Well, I'm sorry. I don't know what I'm doing wrong.
Judy, I'm getting a message that WordPad does not support all the features of this document's format. Maybe it's not you. Maybe it's.
Huh. Maybe it's a stupid computer. Well, that's going to spoil what I had planned. It the other day, didn't it? Okay, I'm going to, all right, I'll stop the share. And turn this, okay. Well, let me encourage you to go to that site. And what the video is he's a man from Ghana who actually has made these life-size bronzes of slaves as they were being brought off the slave ship. And it's a huge sculpture that sits out there in the yard, so that as you visit it, you see these people in chains and, you know, barely dressed. Their mouths are gaping in horror. And it's very powerful. And I really did want you to see that. I'm afraid that's going to happen with the other one I wanted to show. Susan had mentioned that she had rented the movie The Color Purple. And so I went and found a film clip of it that I thought was really, really good, but I'm not sure it's going to work. So I guess I won't even try to mess with that. But it's, how many of you remember seeing that movie? Haven't, I encourage you to rent it. Powerful. It's really where Oprah makes her debut into the and to the world that any of us have ever heard of her before. And she plays a woman who, it's right after the Civil War, and the slaves are free, but they're still being treated horribly. And this one scene that I was going to show you, it reminded me of this Mary Turner story. They don't lynch the character that Oprah is playing, but they beat her up.
Yeah.
And it starts with her and her children have come to town. She's standing by her wagon, and this white woman comes up to her and says to her little girl, "Oh, you're such a pretty little," no, I don't think she calls her pretty. "You're just such a cute little girl." And then she says, "How would you like to come be my maid?" And the Oprah character says, "Hell no." And the woman says, "What did you say?" "I said, hell no." And about that time, her husband, and she shoves her. Her husband comes up and he says, "What did you say?" And before long, the whole town is surrounding her, and she gets her companion to take the children away as they are beating her up. So it was it was so realistic thinking about how a crowd suddenly turned so ugly. And that is part of the history that maybe we haven't experienced it particularly, but it's there. And what I think Latasha is trying to say is that we have to know this. We have to know from whence the African-American population has come, the stories they've grown up with. As someone has said, they give their sons the talk. Well, the talk in white language usually means something about sex, but in the Black language, it means about how not to get yourself shot by a policeman and what to do if you're pulled over or if you're stopped, and how to be nonviolent and non-resistant. So, Nancy, were you going to say something?
Yeah, if you read, like Susan, I think was the one who read Austin Channing Brown's book. This lynching museum remains a memory that she has nightmares about to today. And she went as a school kid from, I think, Chicago down to either Alabama or Mississippi. And she just could never get that away from her mind. And it is an amazing, after I read that book, I went to the same site you're trying to show us, and you should take the time to go look at that site. It might not all be easy to look at, but it's becoming aware of what our BIPOC have had to deal with.
Exactly. Well, in the story, she starts out talking about going to the gym to watch a basketball game and encountering this woman who immediately wants to talk about segregation or desegregation. And let's see, what page was that I put? On page 18. Says, all seemed fine until suddenly his wife brought up desegregation. How the conversation went from basketball to politics to desegregation, I still don't know. And in the moment, I was dumbfounded. And I was wondering what your all's experience with desegregation has been. Jen, it would have been before your time, but I'm sure you had stories, or maybe you were a little girl. I don't know whether you were involved in desegregation. I'm curious about the rest of you. I was living in Nashville when Nashville was one of the last large cities to have finally to desegregate, if you will, after it had been mandated by the Supreme Court. And I was teaching, and I was actually mostly substituting, and I was at my son's school. I remember that he was in the second grade, I believe, and they started busing young Black children into white neighborhoods, and there were older white children who were bused out into inner city neighborhoods. And they had some all fifth grade schools and all sixth grade schools, and it was very convoluted. And part of the reason why is that Nashville is actually a countywide school system. It's also a countywide government, and so it is huge compared to a lot of school districts that are, more, I grew up in Dallas and there were probably 10 school districts around, and we know how many there are in San Antonio, but this has one school system for the whole county. So these distances that these children were traveling on buses was just, incredible. So they put these little kids on the bus at 7 o'clock in the morning and they barely got to school by 9. So, I mean, that's a long time for children to be on a bus. It really was, it was heartbreaking. I never will forget. I was also working on a master's degree at Vanderbilt, and I walked in one day, I was going to sub, and the principal said to me, well, she said, I hope you're happy, because we'd had this conversation before when we knew it was coming. She said, I hope you're happy. You got what you wanted. I said, well, it is what it is, and it has to be. They figured they did a better job the second year of getting the kids closer to the schools that they were going to, or where they lived. But it was chaotic that first year. So I had an immediate experience of desegregation right in the middle of it. I'm wondering about some of the rest of you, if you recall any experiences you had, or just what it was like as you realized that suddenly, we've talked about today being a day where everything is going to be different. Well, that was a day when everything was going to be different. So I'll quit mouthing and see if somebody else has something to say.
I was curious about the use of the word integration was not in this book at all. She uses desegregation. Do you differentiate the integration as proactive and desegregation is dismantling, or?
At the time, I don't think I ever thought the words were used a lot together.
Yeah.
We're integrating, now we're, desegregating.
Busing in my mind was always associated with integrating, not desegregating, in the way the Los Angeles City Schools promoted it. But I don't know. It was interesting to me. She never used the word at all.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. Yeah. Anybody else have an experience they recall?
I do. I remember my son in the 6th grade was bused, and because Clark County School District, which is Las Vegas, Nevada, was the whole city. And so Ben had he was bused from our area to another area of town that was Black for 6th grade. Mm. And for a whole year. And that's a really good distinction between, or at least gets me thinking about integration versus desegregation, because that year really didn't do anything. He enjoyed the bus ride because it was long. It wasn't that long, Judy, but it was like 45 minutes on a bus with his buddies. But it didn't really do anything to foster knowledge or understanding. And I remember going to a school day, and it was kind of weird. It was like something that they had to do, but there wasn't a lot of thought put into it. Here we were, a bunch of white parents in this Black school, predominantly Black school. And I thought about here where she says, enforcing a law, on page 19, enforcing a law didn't dismantle racism. Diversity doesn't disrupt systemic racism. The process of desegregation lacked recognition of psychological and emotional effects on both the white and the Black communities. Mm-hmm. And what I remember from that time, excuse me, was not that I had a greater knowledge or understanding of the Black community, but the kind of apprehension of just going there, because there wasn't any of this preparation, like she says, or this sense that there might be white anxiety and Black anger, because it was something that was just forced on them without a lot of understanding. And I don't know if this is such a huge issue, and I don't have any answers, but I do remember that this was a year when Ben was bused, but that was the end of it. There wasn't a lot of, and it didn't change his life tremendously. So that's what I remember.
Bonnie, you had something.
Well, I was going to say something about maybe more how communities, not schools, but I do remember that some of the schools in the Carolinas shut down, and there was a year there that kids didn't learn a whole lot. Some didn't learn anything. But I did live in Atlanta during a period when the Blacks were trying to integrate, trying to take advantage of the integration. And there was a restaurateur that was aggressively trying to keep the Blacks out of his restaurant. And he changed it to a private club, and they still kept trying to come. Well, the whole of Atlanta, all the Blacks were going out and trying to integrate into different things. And I was lifeguarding that summer, and they were going around to all the pools. And eventually they made it to my pool. It was all pretty, the Blacks weren't violent. It was the white people that were being violent in the town. And they didn't cause any trouble, probably because I was there, or maybe they just got out. The white people just got out and left, and the Black people stayed for maybe half an hour, and then they left. But the guy that ran, interesting little tidbit, the guy that was the restaurateur was Maddox, and he eventually became the governor of Georgia.
I'd like to say something. We were in Memphis, Tennessee, and what I noticed most in our neighborhood, we were in an area that might have been considered Midtown, and it was mostly white, but there was a housing project across the highway that was mostly Black, and those children were attending my kids' schools. And what happened in our neighborhood was all of our neighbors went off to private school, and we stayed in the public schools because we felt like that was what we should do. The kids, I didn't hear of much trouble with the kids at all. The kids seemed to handle it pretty good, but this was grade school, and I think our daughter ended up in the junior high before we left. But the children handled it probably better than the parents, because many of the parents just pull their kids out and put them in private school.
Happened all over the South.
Yeah. Still, there's a legacy of it. Still, it's kind of gone away again, I think, as public schools have improved. But there was a time, I would say in the 80s up to 2000 even, where anybody who had the means did not send their kids to public school, particularly Louisiana and Georgia.
Right.
In 1990, 1991, John was stationed in Valdosta, Georgia. And Valdosta, Georgia still has quite a problem in race. And our daughter was a junior going into her senior year, and our son was a sixth grader. We were able to get our daughter into half day at school and half day at the local college, so she could get challenged. Our son, we had to put into private school because the curriculum he was introduced to when he got to Valdosta used the same textbooks that he had used the year before in the 5th grade in Northern Virginia. But the way they continued to segregate the Black population from the white population, the Black population was over 80% in this high school, was by grades. And any white child who took a class was given an AP 5 if they got an A. And all of the Black kids got 4s if they got an A. So at our daughter's high school graduation, there were 51 honor students. One of those honor students was of color. And they had continual problems, and they still do in Valdosta, Georgia.
John, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that part of the divisions in the private schools, we always think of the South, but remember our former president Obama had his children, and a lot of diplomats in Washington D.C. have kids in private schools. They have that, so I would think it's more, in a lot of ways, it's more economic than segregated. It's segregated through economics as opposed to skin color in a lot of cases. But I would like to, Google's great, and desegregation, this is the definition. It refers to a legal or political process of ending the separation and isolation of different racial or ethnic groups. Integration refers to a social process in which members of different racial and ethnic groups experience fair and equal treatment within a desegregated environment. And so there, again, just to keep the definitions, you know, we all have different definitions for what these mean, but that's according to Google, if you believe Google. Hopefully you do. So that's all. Thanks.
Thank you. Bonnie's story about the swimming pool brought back a memory. I think I told you about how I was in Germany when I first realized I had a Black man living next door to me. And as I said, then we got to be friends. And I remember one time I went with them to the pool, this big civic pool in this little town where we were stationed. And I remember him saying, "Oh, I've got to sit in the shade because I'll burn." And I remember thinking to myself, what? You know, how can, here I'm trying to get a tan, you know, out there slathering on sun lotion, and he's hiding from the sun because it'll burn him. And it's that's one of those things that as a white person, you have these preconceived notions about things. And I remember just thinking, oh, burned, you know, of course he doesn't want to get any darker, you know, so really.
That would be my story, because we lived in Kansas, where I was full and did all kinds of extracurriculars with a good friend who was Black. And I remember her at a pool letting me know for the first time that she was capable of sunburn. I would have never, ever guessed that. So that was a revelation to me. But I was going to say something last week, just on a light note, that our daughter, we've worked really hard trying to avoid prejudicial statements in any way in our family. We were stopped at a bus stop in Dallas, and there was a lady waiting for the bus, and she was of color. And Stephanie made the comment, she said, "Oh, Mama, she must be really old." And I asked her why. And she said, "Well, bananas get darker when they get old."
Did the lady hear her?
She
The lady hear
figured that
Yeah.
the lady had to be very old.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, I had a kind of an experience like that when Troy was about 3, I think. And I remember we'd gone to the library and gotten books, and then we went to have ice cream. And the lady that was serving ice cream was African American, and she was very dark. And he started crying and said, you know, "I don't like her. I don't like her." I said, I was, you know, and I was, "Why? What's the matter?" "She's mean. She's Black." And I said, "What?" And so, I looked over at her, and she really was scowling. She was just, you know, I think if she'd smiled, it never would have happened. But I remember thinking, I got to get this ice cream, get this kid out of here, you know, because I too was trying so hard to help him to understand, you know, the differences and to be, you know, not judgmental or think, you know, and so it was just one of those things you think children see things so differently than we do.
The schools that our children went to in Memphis, the boys were in the second and fourth grades. And Brian, the youngest, was in a class where they had second graders and third graders, because they didn't have enough kids, you know, to have 2 separate classes for that one. I guess they had so many that were full, and then they made this one class that was combined. and he had a black teacher. He had also had a black teacher his first year in school. And at the end of the school year, Brian had learned so much they bumped him up to the 4th grade because that teacher had done such a good job of teaching those children individually and let them progress rather than saying, no, you're a 2nd grader, you can't study this or learn this. And so to me, I was so proud of the fact that these teachers were doing such a great job. And I never really thought about, I'm trying to remember, I know the classes were integrated because I saw other children there. I was active in the PTA. And I never thought about the cost maybe to the kids or the teachers, what they might be experiencing in their own lives. But I just was so thankful that they were such good teachers.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I thought we would look at the questions on page 33 and kind of work our way down through them. The last question is really what we've been talking about, is our racial history as we have experienced it. We know things from like the Lynching Museum and other Civil Rights Museum, all of those, that there have been many other parts of our history that we didn't experience ourselves, but we need to know about it. But going back to the first question, is truth important on the Christian journey? Explain your answer. And if you looked at these questions, I'm wondering if anybody wrestled with that one. Is truth important on the Christian journey? My first inclination was, well, that's a no-brainer. Of course it is. But then you have to kind of get underneath that. And where is she coming from?
Well, truth is one of those things you understand differently at different stages of life, or at least that was my experience.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say yes, is truth, and yes, truth is important, but it does change some as you grow and as you experience more of life with other people. And particularly having had the opportunity to experience people around the world, I became very accustomed to people that thought differently and looked differently and all that kind of thing. And it got to where they were just people, They all had 2 legs and 2 arms and 2 eyes and got up and walked around and talked and did business and moved on.
Others? Is truth important in the Christian?
Warren, may I ask a question? When you came back to the States, did you feel the difference in your experience when you were overseas with different races compared to what it was like here?
Well, people in different countries I guess they had a culture that was different than other countries. And I noticed that, but I didn't think of it as being distinctively different by race at all. Or it never occurred to me, maybe, I don't know.
Where were you, Warren?
Sorry.
Well, I've worked in over 80 countries over the years. And so I've been all over the world. And there's goods and bads to that, I guess. But I've always looked at it as a good.
Bonnie was going to say something. Go ahead, Bonnie.
Warren just kind of reminded me of a situation once that I was in. I had an opportunity to go on a mission trip to South Africa when I was living in Destin. And I went with this other lady who was a school teacher there in town, but was born and raised in Destin. And Destin was like a fishing village, and they didn't have any Black people in that town. There was one family that came to town while we were there and left after 2 years. And my son was friends with the boy that was in his class. But when we went to South Africa, we had, I thought, a fantastic opportunity to go and sit in and participate in a church service there. And I was really excited about it, and I didn't really pay a whole lot of attention to her, but somebody pointed out that she was crying, and I turned around and said, "Are you okay?" And she said, "I will be." She was frightened to death because she had never been around so many Black people. And I was kind of taken back. I couldn't believe that she had to get over that all in one time, you know. But anyway, that was, but
Almost a child's response, you know, to
yeah.
something she'd never experienced.
One thing Tasha says during this talk about truth and awareness is that truth is the foundation of awareness. So that's where I see truth as being extremely important, because without truth, you're not going to be aware.
We were watching PBS news this week, and they did a segment on a man of color, a Black man, who was pointing out the textbooks that students still have in some parts of the South. And in one particular textbook, slavery really wasn't mentioned that much. They were calling people from Africa immigrants, people that were Black and came to the South were immigrants. And he pointed out that school systems like Texas that are so big and have so much influence on book publishers that a lot of the policies that are determined by our state are also part of the educational system in other states as well, because those books are more easily available. Yeah. I thought that was an eye opener to me. I hadn't thought about that.
Jennifer, you had something.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the truth one, when I first read it, I thought, well, sure, that's obvious. Like, truth is important. But I also know that truth is really not something that there's not just one thing that everybody has agreed on is the truth. And I know a whole lot of Christian people around the world and in our community who see the truth as completely opposite as to what I see as the truth. So in some ways, I think it's more important to be open to seeing a different truth than what you identify as the truth. Because, I mean, if everybody just held fast to their truth, they wouldn't ever be able to change it.
Now, you're reminding me that this last week, you know, we were all last week giving each other names of books that we've been reading. And Julie, you mentioned, and Jane said it was being used at Hy-Vee, the Poor People's History of the United States. And I went and looked at it, and I said, oh, I'm going to get this. And right below it, there was something about somebody who's written a book that's saying that this man is unduly influenced. It was a very right-wing response to this man. I think he subsequently has died. His Zen, is that the husband? And it was talking about how this book has poisoned the minds of universities and now in schools, and that it's almost that same mantra of, you know, America's always been great, so why are you saying anything bad about it? And I didn't buy either book, although I think I may still, but I just thought, I've got so many books right now, I'm not sure I want to wait for that. But I just found that fascinating. So it's what you're saying, Jennifer, that, you know, some people will say one thing and somebody comes along and says, no, that's not the truth. This is the truth, you know, this is the truth. And so it's really hard. I found two scriptures that I thought could kind of help guide us through this. And this, not only the one in Psalm 25, guide me in your truth and teach me, but John 14:6, I am the way and the truth and the life, Jesus says. And also he says in chapter 8 of John 32, you will know the truth and the truth will set you free. And I think that's what this question is getting at, is if we are Christians, that we have to seek the truth. And by seeking and following Christ, we have a better chance, perhaps, hearing the real truth and understanding it. Now, question number 2, why do we sometimes try to suppress truth? What motivation might be at work when we avoid engaging with truth? Hard to hear.
Mhm.
The discomfort. It's
Discomfort, yeah.
It's discomfort. And I think recognition of truth so many times is based on individual experience.
Mhm.
So, like you said, Jennifer, it's hard to recognize that what we may think is the truth isn't the truth for everyone.
Any other
Judy,
response?
Judy, I just wanted to mention the book that I couldn't remember the title of last week, if I could,
Yeah, please.
because it was different. It's called Pax Americana. So maybe some of you had already read it. Anyway,
No.
it was a really
Pax Americana. And who's the author?
Elizabeth Fenn, Fenn.
Fenn. Okay. And the gist of it is,
Well, it's the story of the smallpox epidemic in 1775 to 1782. So more Native American.
introduced to the natives. Is that what you'd said before? Planting the
Some of it was accidental, but also it was purposely done in some places. So another book I wanted to mention was The Black Count. And it was the story of Alexander Dumas' father. And I thought of Jennifer when I remembered this one, because maybe some of you read The Count of Monte Cristo when you were in junior high. And the true count was based on his own father, who was half Black. His mother was from Haiti. Anyway, I gave a copy to Natasha in case she hadn't read it, because it's kind of an uplifting story of how he went and built all this stuff up in Haiti. It may not have survived. It did not survive, but at least.
interesting. Okay, I got both of those written down. Anything else about suppressing truth or any other thing? Let's look at question number 3. List at least 2 scriptures that call us to a common and shared memory of our faith. I had a hard time with that one. I didn't spend much time with it. Did anybody else find scriptures?
I thought of the faith of a mustard seed and how many times I have gone back to that scripture because that's required. That's all I needed at that time.
I went way back to the beginning.
Okay.
Because the way I interpreted this was the dignity of all humanity. So I went right back to Genesis.
Okay.
1:27. So God created humankind in his image, in the image of God. He created them, male and female, he created them. So I went to that, and then to Romans 10. For there is no distinction between Jew and Greek. The same Lord is Lord of all, and is generous to all who call on him. So when we look at scriptures like I am the way, the truth, and the life, I think it's important to remember that Jesus Christ said those things. They were written about him and who he went to. And he hung out with people who were different. He didn't hang out with the powerful. He hung out with the people who were on the outside, who'd been othered. And so for me, what this means is that my truth, there's a certain element, a common element about truth, which is what we go to when we first ask that question, you know, is truth important? Well, of course it's important. But I think it's also important to remember that my truth is colored by my, as Sue said, my life experience, my paradigm, my normal. That colors my life. Somebody else's truth is colored by their experience. And we all cling to this hope that our faith gives us, and that's a good thing. But I think along the way, it's important for us all to remember that we have to be aware that we aren't the only game in town, and that another person's truth may be vastly different for a very good reason. Even though they live in this same country, there is a vast difference between how we all live as individuals. So that's why I kind of went right back to the beginning with those. Yeah.
Anybody else have a scripture? Okay, number 4, why is it important to be familiar with historical events? Almost a no-brainer too, you know.
Yeah. Our history, when we were taught history, we got no Black history.
Yeah.
Donna?
I was just going to say that idealistically, the answer to that is it holds our leadership accountable.
Mm-hmm.
But unfortunately, it does not do that. We do not do that. That's just my comment on that.
Yes.
It would be nice if it happened that way.
I have to make a comment as an immigrant. I came to this country when I was 22 years old, and I had what I considered a pretty good education, but I did not know. There was nothing in my history about the role of Great Britain in slave trading. I had no idea. I had to learn that when I came here.
Well, I didn't learn that in school. I learned it from reading out, you know, as an adult.
Yeah.
So we were in the same boat.
So can you think of some you just mentioned an historical fact, number 5, related to our nation's racial history, in this case, Britain's racial history, that you learned outside of school? I think most of what I learned was out of school. I don't remember. I remember studying the Civil War and, you know, and what that was about.
States' rights.
Well, you know,
That we were taught.
I did know it was about slavery, and you know, Lincoln was predominantly, you know, the Emancipation Proclamation and all that. You know, being from Texas, Juneteenth was often, you know, was talked about a whole lot more than here than it was in other parts of the South, because it was really to the Texas slaves that came on June the 19th. But I didn't know about Jim Crow. I never heard that term until fairly recent years, and yet apparently it was a term, I guess politically, was talked about for many, many years. But the rest of
I didn't experience it in school. So much of what I knew about the segregation and everything was what my parents told me. Our folks did talk about what was going on and what they thought was right and wrong and that type of thing. And I think it left me rather naive in some respects, so that I kind of assumed that everybody had the same privilege as I did. I wasn't aware of that white privilege situation. And I made some real boo-boos with some Black kids that today is so embarrassing because I think I really put them on the spot without realizing it.
John? Go ahead, Tracy, while John's unmuting.
I was just going to say, I think we're all of a similar age. And to me, television made a huge difference in the civil rights movement. You could watch the lunch counters being integrated. You could watch people being beaten up. And the brutality that we could visually and come encounter with, I think was very, very eye-opening. And I was just thinking about, was it James Byrd in Jasper, Texas? The guy that was not but 19 years ago. That this kind of stuff is going on. And, you know, even not very long ago, there's still being lynching sites that are being found, and the artifacts, if you want to call them that are left from this period are mind-boggling. And a book can never portray it. And at that time, too, the Vietnam War was the first war that came to our living room. You could sit and eat dinner in front of the TV and watch the war being fought. And it's kind of like our reality is so different now, and everything is available to see. And you know, then we've got body cameras and on and on. But
person, I think of Ferguson in Tulsa. That was news to me just a few years ago.
well, even in South Africa, I didn't realize that apartheid had really not been dismantled legally until the mid-90s. And just because it's legally dismantled doesn't mean, you know, the reality has come true. But you look at all the thousands of years that things have gone on, and we're living in just a fraction of the spectrum of time, and things move much faster nowadays with all the communication.
Well, the last question we're going to deal with is number 6. Why does the process of bridge building begin with awareness, which is what we're trying to do? I don't think you can do anything unless you're aware, you know, unless your conscience is raised. And I think when you engage in this kind of a introspection, that, you know, it changes you.
Remember the first session? Most everyone said their first encounter with a Black person was through hired help. And I thought that that was kind of revealing that pretty much everybody said the same thing. But the big problem, I think, that's always been in front of us, we don't engage. We're segregated by economics or by physical location. And most of us live our lives without any perception that there's another whole world out there. And it's just convenient. We've insulated ourselves, maybe not out of malice, but it is the way it is.
I want to end with sharing something from an article from Presbyterians Today. It was written by a woman, she's the editor. Her name is Donna, and I can't pronounce her middle name, but so she's Donna Jackson. And she entitles it The Great Bookcase Reveal. And as I look at your pictures, I see Pam in front of a lot of books and Tracy in front of a lot of books. And my books are hidden behind the screen because they're all stacked up over there. But she starts the article off by saying that this retired pastor walks into her office and he says he wants to get to know her. And he's just new to the church, and he turns around and starts looking at her books on her bookshelf. And he looks and he looks and he looks and he doesn't say anything. And finally he turns back to her and he says, "Well, now I know you." And he walks out the door. And so the point being is that we are what we read. What? And so because this whole issue of Presbyterians Today is about what we're talking about, the great racial divide and systemic racism, she says she begins looking at her bookshelf and realizing that the only Black author is Howard Thurman. And so she ends this by saying, "My bookcase is far from credible, so I am giving it a makeover. There are now the works of James Cone and Cornel West joining Howard Thurman in the theological section of the bookcase. I am also eagerly awaiting for my womanist theology book to be delivered. On my 18th century American shelf, books on Black Americans such as Crispus Attucks, First to Fall in the Boston Massacre, Salem Poor, known for his heroism at the Battle of Bunker Hill, and Lemuel Haynes, a Revolutionary War era pastor, remembered as the first Black man ordained as a preacher in the United States, are coming. There's also a poet I need to reacquaint myself with. I was introduced to her by a clergy mentor of mine while working on a paper on American women poets. I'd been focusing on Anne Bradstreet, but it was then that my friend offered the name of Phyllis Wheatley, who was the first African-American to publish a book of poetry in the colonies, 1773. She goes on like that. And so I'm thinking to myself, well, now our bookshelves are beginning to show books that are written by African-Americans, and many of them are on the bestseller lists. And so I would encourage all of us to continue reading as we become more acquainted with other people's histories and what their worlds have been like. So let's close with the prayer that follows the question, the prayer for truth. I don't know who Heather Wendler is, but she's written a lovely prayer. I'll read it aloud if you would read along with me. Lord, you ask us to shine your light of truth into the darkness of sin, both in the world and in our own lives. We need your truth to cut away our nation's long-standing racial inequity, our idolatry of whiteness and nationalism, and any form of injustice or oppression. Lord, let us bravely cling to the truth of your love, truth that leads us to speak against all forms of hatred toward people created in the Imago Dei. Amen.
Amen.
Place to end, and we'll start with chapter 3 next week. So good to be with you all, and we'll be together in spirit as we go to worship in a few minutes.
Thank you so much.
Week.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.